The crisis hit with the force of a lightning strike. Overnight, Orion Dynamics, the proud tech titan of Chicago, found itself staring at the edge of a $100 million disaster. 3 days of frantic scrambling had yielded nothing except rising panic and a sickening sense that the company's most important contract was about to slip through its fingers. Inside the top-floor war room, the atmosphere felt as thick as a storm cell pressing down on the city. Screens around the room bled crimson, flashing error logs like warning sirens no one could silence. Lines of broken code crawled downward in an endless waterfall, each message more damning than the last. Engineers hunched behind laptops, with faces drained pale, their eyes twitching from sleepless nights, and the weight of knowing that every second dragged Orion Dynamics closer to ruin. Victoria Lane stood at the head of the table, like a commander surveying a battlefield littered with casualties. At 41, she carried power the way others carried breath, naturally efficiently, almost dangerously. Her tailored navy suit looked carved rather than sewn, her posture straight enough to slice through doubt. But her expression tonight held something harsher than authority. It was disappointment sharpened into a blade. She swept her gaze across the room, and the engineers braced as if preparing for impact. Inside her mind, the numbers echoed relentlessly. 3 days wasted, 6 emergency meetings, nearly $1 million in consultant fees, and nothing but a digital corpse lying on the table. She had fought too many battles to tolerate incompetence. But this was unforgivable. The predictive AI system, the crown jewel they had promised to a demanding New York client, had collapsed during final testing. Latency spikes, algorithmic drift, cascading failures. A single malfunction in this system could destroy years of cultivated trust and hand their competitors a victory wrapped with a bow. Her voice cut through the air, low and cold. We are on the verge of catastrophic loss. 3 days, and not one of you has found the root cause. No one dared respond. Someone shifted the sound embarrassingly loud in the silence. Another swallowed hard. One engineer stared so firmly at her keyboard that it seemed she hoped to vanish into the keys. Victoria felt the familiar burn of frustration beneath her ribs. She let the silence stretch another beat, then another, letting the weight of her words settle like stone. Her mind churned with unanswered questions. How had her elite team failed this miserably? Why, after so many hours, did none of them see what felt so fundamentally wrong with the data trail? She could read their fear, their exhaustion, their desperate wish that she would offer comfort instead of command. But comfort did not sign contracts. Comfort did not save empires. She turned toward the door, her heels cracking sharply against the gleaming floor. "You have 5 minutes," she said without raising her voice. "I expect a solution, not another apology." The door closed behind her with a soft thud, but the room felt as though a hurricane had just passed through. For a moment, Victoria leaned against the railing, overlooking the atrium below, her heart beating in slow, controlled pulses. She stared at the sprawling floor plan of Orion Dynamics, each department lit by bright midnight lamps, and wondered which corner of this building still held answers instead of excuses. Downstairs, far from the polished conference table and suffocating tension, the night janitorial crew moved quietly through the corridors. One of them, a 35-year-old man with worn sneakers and a gray uniform faded from too many washes, paused beside an overflowing trash bin. His name was Ethan Cole. To most people here, he was invisible background noise, the kind of worker whose presence was only noticed when something spilled or broke. He bent down to pick up a stray soda can that had rolled out, but as he straightened his eyes, drifted toward the glass walls of the war room upstairs. He could see the bright red glow of error charts even from this distance. Something about that color, that pattern, and that frantic blinking. It tugged at a deeply buried instinct. For a split second, the world around him blurred, replaced by the memory of a different life, the hum of MIT labs, whiteboards covered in equations, professors praising his intuition. Then he blinked, and the moment vanished. Ethan exhaled softly, unaware that fate had already begun tightening its grip on him. Unaware that within the next few hours, he would walk into a battlefield no one expected him to enter. Unaware that the answer Victoria Lane demanded was already flickering inside his mind, like a spark waiting to ignite. And when it did, everything at Orion Dynamics would change. Night settled over Chicago, like a heavy velvet curtain muting the city's restless heartbeat. Orion Dynamics, however, remained defiantly awake. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Server racks pulsed with cold blue glows. And somewhere in the distance, the faint echo of a vacuum cleaner drifted through the corridors, a reminder that even giants relied on those at the bottom to keep them standing. Ethan Cole moved methodically down the hallway outside the war room, pushing his cleaning cart like a quiet traveler crossing a deserted frontier. His hands were steady but worn, his knuckles rough from years of work, far beneath his capabilities. Yet his eyes, those were different. Sharp scanning, always noticing too much. They flicked toward the glass-walled conference room, again drawn by the stubborn red graphs projected inside. He told himself to focus on his job, but something inside him crackled like an ungrounded wire. The error patterns on the screen were impossible to ignore. The symmetry was wrong. The drift in the data was unnatural. He had seen something like that once before during his MIT research days, before life had slammed the door shut and pushed him into this overlooked existence. A soft rattle in his pocket pulled him back. He reached inside and touched the folded paper Mia had given him that morning. Her voice echoed faintly in his memory. "Daddy, the lightning bolt means you can fix big problems." She said it with childish certainty, unaware of the storm he carried behind his quiet smile. He tucked the drawing back safely, gathered a breath, and told himself to keep walking. But he didn't. His feet froze. His pulse thumped sharply. The war room door, left ajar by the frantic engineers, revealed the whiteboard inside, covered in tangled formulas, crossed-out terms, and a dozen frantic attempts to patch something fundamentally broken. Without fully deciding, Ethan stepped inside. The room smelled of burnt coffee and tension, but now it was silent, abandoned in frustration. The whiteboard glared at him, every symbol begging for correction. He approached slowly, as if nearing an altar, and lifted a cleaning rag to wipe the board. Then he stopped. His breath hitched. He saw it. A single misplaced variable. A sigmoid curve inverted in a way that made the entire model collapse inward. A minor weight applied to a node that should have dominated the whole chain. A house built on the wrong foundation. It was so simple. So painfully obvious. His mind tingled with the clarity he had not felt in years, like a dormant instinct roaring back to life. Ethan reached for a red marker. He circled two swapped variables, underlined the misweighted node, and redrew the curve with a few swift, confident strokes. His heart pounded not from fear but from recognition. This was the world he once belonged to, the world he had abandoned because grief demanded it. He stepped back, arms crossed, considering the shape of the solution. "They've been looking at this backwards," he murmured. A voice behind him answered. "And you think you've got it right?" Ethan turned so fast he nearly dropped the marker. There, standing in the doorway, was Victoria Lane. Her sharp eyes locked onto him, unreadable, studying him with the kind of intensity that made lesser executives collapse under pressure. He swallowed. "I was not trying to interfere. I just noticed something." Victoria stepped into the room. The air shifted as though she brought the storm with her. She studied the red markings silently, her face giving nothing away. Then she reached into her pocket, pulled out her tablet, and keyed in the adjustments with crisp, practiced gestures. Ethan's chest tightened. "I should not be here. I'm sorry. I'll leave stay." The single word hit him like a command carved in stone. 8 seconds later, the system processed the changes. The error rate dropped instantly. The accuracy spiked. Red turned to a clean, brilliant green. Victoria stared at the screen, a faint tremor passing through her breath. "Accuracy up nearly 20%, she whispered more to herself than to him. Error reduction over 60%. She turned her gaze fully on him now, sharp enough to slice through lies, and Ethan felt bare under her scrutiny. "Name?" "Ethan Cole," he answered quietly. She studied him again, as if reading his entire past in the lines of his face. "Position?" "Night janitor." "Education?" He hesitated. "I attended MIT, left junior year." Why the pain flickered across his eyes before he could hide it. "My wife died. My daughter was 3. Someone had to raise her." She absorbed this without blinking. Her voice carried no pity, only calculation and something else, something quieter beneath the steel. "Do you understand what you just did?" Ethan glanced at the board. The system was choking on its own logic. "You do not pour boiling water into a clogged pipe. You clear the blockage." For the first time, a corner of Victoria's mouth twitched the ghost of a smile she rarely let anyone see. "You think in plumbing metaphors. I explain complicated things to a 6-year-old, he replied. "It helps." She stepped closer, her presence forceful but strangely grounding. "Tomorrow, 8 in the morning, conference room C. You will be on the observer list." "I should not," he began, mind racing to Mia's school drop-off to his shift to the engineers who would undoubtedly revolt. "This is not a request, Mr. Cole," she said softly, but with iron beneath it. "It is an instruction." She turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. Her voice dropped, losing its corporate armor for a fleeting moment. "Give your daughter one more reason to be proud of her father." When she disappeared, silence reclaimed the room. Ethan looked at the red markings on the whiteboard, then at his mop leaning quietly in the corner. A small, incredulous laugh escaped him. "Well," he whispered, "looks like you might finally get a promotion, old friend." And far above the war room, deep in her private office, Victoria Lane replayed the image of the janitor with the mind of a fallen prodigy, and wondered how someone the whole company overlooked could see what 20 experts had missed entirely. 10 minutes before 8 in the morning, Chicago was still shaking off the remnants of dawn, but inside Orion Dynamics, the air was already charged with anticipation. The elevators chimed, footsteps echoed, and the entire building crackled with the restless energy of people desperate to pretend everything was under control. They did not know that the most important person walking through those halls that morning was not an executive, not an engineer, but a man whose shirt still carried the faint ghost of old coffee stains. Ethan Cole stood outside Conference Room C, straightening the collar of the only button-down he owned, that still looked respectable under fluorescent light. His worn leather satchel hung from his shoulder, weighed down not by tools or reports, but by a small mechanical pencil, a half-filled notebook, and a carefully folded drawing from Mia. The picture showed a man holding a mop in one hand and a lightning bolt in the other, as if he could repair storms themselves. Ethan had tucked it into his bag for courage, though he would never admit it aloud. He inhaled slowly. He had cleaned these hallways for years, moving unseen through conversations he was not allowed to join. Now he was about to sit in a room full of people who built the future for a living, people who would never expect a janitor to walk through the same door they used. The weight of that truth pressed against his ribs like an old bruise. When the door clicked open, the low murmur of conversation inside stuttered and then shifted subtly, not enough for outsiders to notice, but unmistakable to Ethan. Dozens of eyes flicked toward him, some curious, some wary, some visibly irritated. He stepped inside anyway. The room was lit by wide windows that framed the Chicago skyline, a reminder that this city belonged to the ruthless and the relentless. Engineers, analysts, and project managers sat around a long oval table covered with laptops and stacks of documents. Their suits were ironed and their confidence worn like armor. Ethan took the empty chair at the edge of the table, exactly where Victoria Lane had pointed yesterday. He felt out of place painfully, so like a misplaced puzzle piece, forced into a shape that did not fit. Yet beneath that discomfort simmered something warmer, something he had not felt in a long time, the faint glow of belonging. Conversation halted the moment Victoria entered the room. Her presence sliced the tension in half. The room straightened collectively, as if pulled by invisible string. Victoria walked with that polished assuredness she had mastered over years of battles. No one in this room had witnessed battles fought not with code, but with contracts, pressure, and reputation. She began without preamble. Yesterday, Orion Dynamics came within a breath of losing one of its most valuable clients. The core issue was a miscalculation buried deep within the model's predictive loop. A technician touched a tablet. Ethan's red markings appeared on the towering screen at the front of the room, every circle, underline, and curve glowing like a strange signature. In the late hours, Victoria continued. Someone in this building identified the error. Whispers rippled across the table. Heads turned toward Ethan, then away again, as though staring too directly might confirm an uncomfortable truth. This adjustment, she went on, reduced the training error by over 60% and increased prediction stability beyond anything we achieved in the past 3 days. Andrew Bishop raised his hand. Victoria lifted her chin. Mr. Bishop. Andrew spoke with careful diplomacy, but his tone held a razor's edge. With all respect, how do we know this result wasn't luck, one good run, a fortunate configuration? Victoria nodded once. Run the model. The air froze. Andrew hesitated, then keyed in the parameters on his laptop. The room held its breath as the system processed the data. Graph lines shifted, smoothed, aligned. Latency dropped. Overfitting disappeared. The performance bar turned green and stayed green. Andrew's jaw tightened. There are still variables untested, unknowns. His gaze slid pointedly toward Ethan. And there's the matter of expertise. Ethan could have stayed silent. The old version of him, the man who spent years shrinking into the corners of rooms he cleaned, might have done exactly that. But something in him rebelled against the idea of disappearing again. He leaned forward slightly. If it were luck, he said, then I hope we're smart enough to learn from luck when it walks into the room holding a mop. A few engineers choked back startled laughs. Others looked horrified. Victoria did not smile, but her eyes warmed by a single degree, the closest she came to applause. She closed the discussion with a firm nod. The numbers speak for themselves. The improvement is real, reproducible, and necessary. We proceed with the revised model. The meeting dissolved into a mix of grudging acceptance and stunned confusion. Ethan rose slowly, ready to retreat to the safety of the floors he understood. He nearly reached the elevator when someone blocked the doors with a hand. Victoria stepped inside, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. She handed one to him without ceremony. "You held your own," she said. Ethan shook his head. "I was not trying to." Perhaps that she replied is why it worked. He chuckled softly. "I fix broken things. That is all I have ever done." She studied him with an expression he could not decipher. That line about clearing clogs instead of pouring in boiling water. You speak like a man who rebuilds the world from the foundation up. Explaining things to a child teaches you that, he said. Mia understands plumbing better than most grown adults. Victoria's gaze softened. Interesting. Useful, even. They stood quietly as the elevator descended. For once, the silence between them was not sharp or cold, but strangely open, as if two very different worlds had paused just long enough to acknowledge each other. When the doors opened, they walked out side by side. Neither of them knew it yet, but this was the first shift in a fault line preparing to reshape both of their lives. For the first time in years, Ethan Cole felt the world tilt in a direction he no longer recognized. He had returned to his night shift, expecting the familiar rhythm of mops, buckets, and quiet hallways. But the routine had been broken. Something inside him refused to settle back into invisibility. His name appeared on meeting schedules buried between that of senior analysts and team leads. He received group chat invitations filled with acronyms he had not used since his MIT days. People nodded at him now, not with warmth, but with the stiff acknowledgement reserved for unwelcome miracles. Within days, the quiet hum of Orion dynamics shifted. Conversations around him changed from casual greetings to abrupt pauses. Smiles flattened into tight lines. A few colleagues from the custodial team clapped him lightly on the shoulder, saying things like, "Heard you did something big, Ethan," though they did not quite understand what it meant. But in the engineering department, where pride was currency and hierarchy, sacred, his presence triggered a ripple of cold tension. During morning meetings, Ethan sat near the edge of the table notebook, open mechanical pencil in hand. He wrote observations quietly, only speaking when asked. Still, the room bristled when he entered, as if he carried a draft strong enough to unsettle every carefully stacked expectation. Small moments revealed the shift more clearly. A pair of analysts walking past him in the hallway whispered, "Shortcut," before pretending they had been discussing traffic. In the break room, someone left a printed meme near the coffee pot, showing a mop wearing a graduation cap. He found it mildly clever, but he also felt the sting behind it. He tossed it in the recycling bin. On Thursday morning, the tension finally sharpened into open challenge. The meeting was a progress review for algorithm optimization. Victoria Lane sat at the head of the table, flawless posture. As always, her expression composed but alert. The room buzzed with the clipped nervousness of people preparing to defend their work. Andrew Bishop adjusted his tie before speaking, his tone polite, but laced with something sharper. "We are leaning heavily on adjustments that have never been tested at scale," he began. "Our clients expect certainty. They may not appreciate learning that a crucial update came from someone without a completed degree or formal engineering credentials." Silence hit the room hard. A few engineers shifted uncomfortably. Others looked down at their screens as if retreating would protect them. Ethan kept his gaze fixed on the data board, twirling his pencil slowly. He did not flinch. He had been underestimated before. Years of pushing a mop while overhearing conversations that ignored his existence had given him thick armor. Victoria lifted her eyes with dangerous calm. "Clients care about results," she said. "The results are speaking clearly." Andrew inhaled through his nose, visibly annoyed, but disciplined enough not to push further. The meeting continued, but the air had cooled to ice. Later that afternoon, Ethan was in the lobby changing mop water when a familiar presence appeared at the edge of his vision. Victoria Lane. Not in her usual armor of a perfectly tailored suit, but in a long camel coat, her hair pulled loosely behind her. She carried a slim folder tucked beneath one arm. She took a step closer. "Are you busy tonight?" Ethan blinked, thrown off by the question. "I suppose I am free?" "There is a place I go in Lincoln Park," she said. "Quiet? No charts, no whiteboards. Come with me." He met her eyes, searching for the motive beneath the words. "Is that an invitation or an order? You may interpret it however you like." For a brief moment they held each other's gaze, two people standing on opposite sides of a life neither fully understood. Then she turned and walked away, trusting he would follow. As the sun dipped over the city, the two of them arrived at a small Italian restaurant tucked into a street lined with brick buildings and soft lanterns. Golden light glowed through frosted windows, casting gentle halos across the sidewalk. Inside the space was a careful blend of warm wood, aged leather, and soft classical music floating from hidden speakers. Victoria was already seated when Ethan approached. He hesitated. She looked different without her sharp blazer, different without the burdens of leadership clinging to her shoulders. Softer, tired perhaps, human. "You look different without the mop," she said, her lips curving in a subtle lift. "And you look different without the entire company on your shoulders," he replied as he took the seat across from her. They fell into a quiet that felt strangely comfortable, broken only by the clink of silverware and laughter from another table. When the waiter brought garlic bread and wine, Victoria waited until Ethan took his first sip before she spoke. "Do you know why I asked you here?" Ethan tilted his head, playful but guarded. "Because watching a janitor struggle with a wine list is entertaining." She shook her head faintly, but for once the edge in her expression softened. "Because I realize that it has been more than 3 years since I have had a real conversation. Not a negotiation, not a report. A genuine conversation where someone asks how my day was and actually means it." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "Sounds like you need a better schedule. Or a therapist." "I tried that," she said dryly. "He quit after the second session. Told me I made him anxious." Ethan laughed, a sound full and unrestrained, the kind that drew glances from nearby tables. He saw the flicker of surprise on her face, then the slow emergence of a real smile, rare, unpolished, and startlingly honest. "There it is," he said quietly. "The human beneath the armor." Victoria looked at him for a lingering moment, something unspoken hanging between them. Then she exhaled, as if releasing a pressure valve she had kept sealed for far too long. Dinner unfolded in a series of shared stories, unexpected humor, and the slow unraveling of barriers neither had admitted existed. Ethan spoke of Mia's uncanny talent for arguing her way out of bedtime. Victoria shared a story about her mother, a woman who once said emotion was a luxury in a tailored suit. They talked about books, hated movie endings, and childhood memories scented with cinnamon or rain. Outside, the night grew colder, but neither of them seemed willing to end the moment. When they parted at the corner, Victoria touched his arm gently. "Tomorrow will be difficult. Not everyone will want you in that room. Be ready." Ethan nodded, the Chicago wind brushing against his coat. "I will be." As she walked away, her silhouette melting into the city lights, Ethan understood one truth with sudden clarity. This was no longer a story about a janitor and a CEO. Something deeper was beginning to shift, and neither of them could stop it now. Fog clung to the Chicago skyline the next morning, weaving through steel towers like a pale curtain drawn across the waking city. The air carried the cold bite of uncertainty, the kind that wrapped itself around nerves and whispered predictions of coming storms. Inside Orion Dynamics, the energy shifted from wary curiosity to something taut and brittle, stretched thin across the upper floors where power lived and breathed. Ethan Cole stepped out of the elevator onto the 21st floor, adjusting the new light blue shirt he had purchased the night before. It still held the crisp creases from the store hanger, but he hoped no one would look closely enough to notice. In his pocket, he carried the smooth, oval lucky stone Mia had handed him before school, pressing it into his palm with a solemn authority only a 6-year-old possessed. "For courage, Daddy," she had said, her small voice filled with unshakable faith. He carried that faith with him now. The strategic conference room stretched nearly the entire length of the floor. Glass walls revealed a sweeping view of Lake Michigan, gray and restless. Inside, a long table gleamed beneath recessed lighting, surrounded by executives, product heads, senior engineers, and even 2 representatives from the board. Conversations flickered in subdued tones, an undercurrent of suspicion running beneath every word. The moment Ethan entered, the low murmur snapped into stillness. Dozens of eyes turned toward him. Some puzzled, some irritated, some blatantly disapproving. Andrew Bishop was seated halfway down the table, arms folded, his expression unreadable, except for the faint arch of a brow that said everything he did not need to voice. To him, Ethan's presence was an intrusion, a disruption to the carefully calibrated world he inhabited. Victoria Lane entered seconds later, her heels striking with controlled authority. She did not sit immediately, but gestured toward a chair near the end of the table. "That is your seat," she told Ethan. He obeyed without hesitation, though the weight of the room pressed hard against his spine as he sat. The leather chair felt too soft beneath him, too polished, too expensive for someone who had scrubbed the company bathrooms 2 nights ago. Yet he kept his gaze steady. Victoria began her tone sharp enough to pierce through resistance. "We are gathered because the neural lag issue has not been fully resolved. Our machine learning loop still shows inconsistencies under prolonged load." She tapped a button on her tablet. The main screen displayed Ethan's revised model, his red annotations now transformed into clean digital adjustments. "This is the optimized structure Mr. Cole proposed." A ripple of discomfort traveled through the room. Andrew spoke first, his voice calm, but hitting like a precision strike. "We have reviewed the concept. The logic is sound, but we do not intend to implement it." Victoria lifted her head slightly. "Reason no precedent," Andrew replied. "It has never been tested at this scale." And more importantly, he let his gaze travel to Ethan with cold deliberation. "We are discussing code written by someone without formal engineering credentials. Someone who has never executed a production deployment. It is a significant risk." The silence that followed was suffocating. A few heads nodded reluctantly. Others looked away. No one seemed willing to be the first to challenge Andrew. Ethan let the pause stretch. He could feel the old familiar pull toward silence, the instinct that pushed him to shrink, to disappear, to avoid confrontation. But he thought of Mia. He thought of her drawing with a lightning bolt. He thought of how she looked at him as if he could lift entire worlds. He exhaled once evenly. "I understand," he said, his voice quiet but unwavering. "I am not the person you expected. And that makes people uncomfortable." Several executives shifted, startled not by the words, but by the lack of apology within them. "But if the numbers are right," Ethan continued, "if the system runs better, then what is the real question here? Who fixed it? Or that it is fixed," the words hung in the air, heavy and ringing. He looked directly at Andrew. "If I were wearing a $1,000 suit and carrying a degree from MIT, you would call this innovation. But because I wear a janitor's uniform and have my daughter's stickers on my laptop, it is considered a risk." The room froze. "If a person's worth is measured only by the cost of mistakes they might make," he added softly, Maybe it is time we measure worth differently. Victoria did not move, but something fierce and bright flickered behind her eyes. She spoke with the authority of someone who had already made her decision long before the meeting began. Roll out the update. The room erupted into soft shock. A sharp inhale from one of the board representatives. A bitter tightening in Andrew's jaw. Several engineers stared down at their hands, torn between fear and reluctant admiration. But the decision was final. Hours later, when the building began to empty for the evening, Ethan escaped to the rooftop balcony. The city stretched below him, a mosaic of lights, dissolving into the rising fog. For a long moment, he allowed the quiet to settle over his shoulders. Footsteps approached. Victoria stepped beside him, arms crossed her camel coat fluttering in the cold wind. She looked at the skyline as though searching for something far beyond the horizon. The meeting was tense, Ethan said. They prefer the predictable, she replied. You are not predictable. He nodded slowly. Then why stick your neck out for me? She turned toward him. Her eyes for once held no corporate armor, only truth. Because you reminded me of something I used to believe before I traded it for board seats and perfectly rehearsed pitch decks. And what was that, he asked? The talent does not need permission to exist. Ethan smiled faintly. Nice idea. Dangerous in the wrong hands. So is silence, she answered. A gust of wind swept across the rooftop, whipping loose strands of her hair into the air. They stood together, without speaking, gazing at the city lights shimmering far below them. Though neither acknowledged it aloud, the thread between them, thin at first, hesitant, had tightened into something undeniable, something that neither expertise nor title could quantify. Something neither of them could walk away from now. 3 days later, before the sun had even climbed over the frozen edges of Lake Michigan, Orion Dynamics pulsed with a frantic energy that spread from floor to floor, like the charged hum before a thunderstorm. Today was the day. The upgraded AI system would be presented to a strategic client group flying in from New York. Their approval could secure a contract large enough to change the company's trajectory entirely. Their doubt, however, could unravel months of negotiation in a single breath. Ethan Cole arrived early, walking through the nearly empty lobby with a determined calm that belied the shifting storm inside him. He wore the same light blue shirt from the strategic meeting pressed as neatly as he could manage. In his pocket, Mia's lucky stone rested against his palm, warm from his nervous grip. He took the elevator to the 18th floor where the main demonstration hall awaited like a stage built for triumph or disaster. The room was vast ceilings stretching high above an elongated glass table. Cold white lights gleamed off polished surfaces. At the front, a massive LED wall displayed the AI interface, alive with pulsing status bars and spinning simulation models. Ethan moved to the technical station in the back, slipping on a headset as if stepping into a cockpit. His fingers hovered above the keyboard, steady but coiled like a runner at the starting line. Victoria Lane entered moments later, dressed in a minimalist black suit that matched the gravity of the day. No jewelry, no softness, only focus. She walked to the stage with her usual precise stride, her expression revealing nothing, not even the pressure she carried like a second heartbeat. The clients arrived, men and women in expensive coats, their greetings clipped and efficient. They settled into their seats as Victoria began the presentation. Thank you for joining us, she said, her voice projecting clarity and absolute control. Today, we will demonstrate a new threshold of responsiveness and learning speed in our predictive system. The opening minutes unfolded flawlessly. Simulations ran at impressive speeds. Algorithms adapted instantly to new data, The clients leaned forward, whispering to one another with interest. Ethan monitored the back-end metrics, watching numbers stabilize exactly where they should. Every green indicator felt like a quiet victory. Then it happened. A flicker. Barely noticeable at first. The neural lag indicator shifted from green to yellow. A subtle hiccup passed through the central simulation. The spinning three-dimensional model stuttered, catching as though its gears had begun grinding. A whisper rippled through the front row. Ethan's breath froze. Andrew Bishop, seated strategically near the clients, leaned slightly toward Victoria. His voice was pitched just loud enough for nearby attendees to hear. "I warned you this system was not ready." Victoria continued speaking, as if she had not heard him. But Ethan saw the slight flicker in her eyes, a silent razor-thin calculation. A voice crackled through Ethan's headset. One of the technicians. "We may have a buffer overload. Restarting the server could fix it, but it will take at least 3 minutes. 3 minutes. In front of these clients, 3 minutes might as well be 3 lifetimes. That delay would be all the proof they needed that Orion Dynamics was still drowning in unresolved issues." Ethan stared at the glowing error registers. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. The safer choice was obvious. Let the restart happen, shift the blame elsewhere, let the system recover slowly, and hope for damage control afterward. But he remembered the way Mia hugged him that morning, whispering, "You can do big things, Daddy." He remembered years of walking these halls unnoticed, watching engineers wrestle with problems he no longer had the right to solve. He remembered Andrew's cold smirk, the doubt, the dismissal. He refused to shrink back into silence. Ethan rolled up his sleeves and bent over the keyboard. His fingers moved with a rapid, practiced rhythm he had not used since his MIT days. Instead of restarting, he accessed the live optimization module he had rewritten. It was risky, reckless, entirely against protocol. But it was right. He tweaked parameters on the fly, adjusting weight distributions, bypassing faulty loops, rerouting the data flow with surgical precision. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but his vision sharpened the world, narrowing down to numbers, logic, and instinct. On the LED display, the simulation stutter eased. Yellow shifted to pale green, then deepened into stable emerald. Latency dropped lower than it had been at any point during the demonstration. The whispers died. The clients straightened. Victoria continued her presentation without so much as a hitch in her tone, seamlessly weaving the recovery into her narrative as though it had been planned all along. When she concluded, the room erupted into applause. The lead representative from New York stepped forward and shook Victoria's hand firmly. "Impressive," he said. "This is precisely why we chose Orion Dynamics." At the back of the room, Ethan removed his headset slowly. His hands trembled now that the danger had passed. He looked up just in time to see Andrew watching him, not with contempt, not with anger, but with something far more surprising, reluctant respect. Hours later, when the hall emptied and the city outside dissolved into evening haze, Ethan remained at his station, breathing in the quiet. He had done it. He had protected something bigger than himself. Victoria appeared in the doorway, her silhouette framed by pale hallway light. "You saved that demo," she said simply. "It was the whole team," he replied, though he did not believe it. "You are being modest," she answered. She stepped beside him close enough that he could feel the faint warmth of her presence. "I spoke to the board," she said. "You are no longer a janitor. I want you on the core development team." Ethan stared at her, stunned. "Are you certain some people will not be happy?" "I am certain," she said, "and I have learned not everyone has to be happy." She extended her hand. "Welcome to a new chapter." Ethan took it. For once, the quiet confidence rising inside him did not feel borrowed or fragile. It felt earned and unshakable. The next morning rose gray and cold over Chicago, the kind of morning that felt as if the city wanted to test anyone brave enough to hope for something better. When Ethan Cole stepped into Orion Dynamics, the lobby lighting seemed sharper, the air heavier, as if the building itself sensed a shift it did not yet trust. For the first time, he was not here to clean the floors. He was here to build something that mattered. But the eyes that followed him told him the world had not caught up to that truth. Whispers trailed behind him like shadows. Some employees offered polite nods, tense and polite, as if acknowledging a stranger who had stolen a seat meant for someone else. Others pretended not to see him at all, hoping invisibility would erase discomfort. Ethan felt the sting, but he kept walking, his daughter's voice echoing softly in his memory. "You can do big things, Daddy." He reached the engineering floor and paused. The energy in the air shifted the moment he stepped inside. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Chairs turned away. Several screens suddenly became objects of intense fascination. Ethan realized instantly that respect here was not given. It was earned drop by drop and sometimes taken only by force. His new workstation sat near the window overlooking Lake Michigan. A fresh monitor glowed softly. A small folded note lay at the center of the desk. He opened it carefully, already knowing exactly who it came from. "Welcome to the team. You earned this." No signature, no title, just the initial. It struck him in a way he was not prepared for, a quiet recognition heavier than applause. He slipped the note into his pocket before anyone could notice, then sat down, letting out a slow breath he did not realize he had been holding. The moment did not last. Andrew Bishop appeared beside him, his posture straight, his expression carefully polite, his tone carrying frost beneath its surface. "Cole," he said, the word clipped. "Settling in, I see." Ethan nodded, trying to. Andrew's gaze moved across the desk, across Ethan, assessing every detail with surgeon-like precision. "Let me be clear. This department is built on discipline and structure. People here have trained for years. I hope you understand the standards expected of you." "I do," Ethan replied, steady but calm. Andrew gave a thin smile. "Good. Because not every problem can be solved with lucky guesses and mop-handle wisdom." He walked away before Ethan could respond, leaving behind a silence that hummed with unspoken challenge. Ethan stared at the empty space for a moment, letting the words settle. They did not break him. They merely reminded him that stepping into a world that never wanted him meant walking through fire again and again, until the fire learned to make room for him. The morning meeting began in a glass-walled conference room filled with the quiet intensity of minds trained to see the world in equations. Victoria Lane sat at the head of the table, perfectly composed, scanning the room with eyes that missed nothing. Ethan entered last, taking a seat near the corner, and felt the temperature of the room dip a degree. Discussions turned to system architecture, latency patterns, and deployment timelines. Ethan listened at first, measuring the rhythm of the team, sensing where the walls stood and where cracks might still exist. When he finally spoke, suggesting an adjustment to reduce redundant loops, the room reacted with visible stiffness. A few engineers exchanged glances. One scribbled something quickly, as if fact-checking the audacity. Victoria, however, looked at him directly. "Explain your reasoning." Her tone was neutral, but there was something deliberate in the way she asked. Ethan explained in precise detail, drawing on instinct memory and nights spent silently analyzing the very system he used to mop around. When he finished, a few people looked reluctantly impressed. Andrew did not. The meeting ended with half-formed acceptance and thinly veiled resistance. Ethan had expected nothing less. He rose from his chair, slowly gathering his notebook, and headed toward the exit. He could feel Victoria's eyes following him, thoughtful, calculating, unreadable. By lunchtime, the fractures in the team became clearer. 2 engineers fell silent when he entered the break room. Another one offered a strained, almost apologetic smile before leaving. Ethan sat alone at a small table, eating quietly, thinking of Mia, wishing he could call her and tell her he was trying, that he was not giving up. But isolation was familiar. He had survived it before. Later that afternoon, he headed back to the development bay, only to stop short when he realized someone had written a message on the corner of the shared whiteboard. Some people should stay in their lane. The words were small, faint, meant to look like a harmless note. But the intention behind them pulsed like a bruise. Ethan stared at it for a long moment, then picked up an eraser and wiped it away, not with anger, with quiet certainty. He would not give anyone the satisfaction of seeing it wound him. When he returned to his desk, he found Victoria standing there, her expression unreadable, her hands clasped behind her back. She waited until he approached before speaking. "Rough day," she said softly. Ethan gave a tired smile. "Rough is manageable." She tilted her head, studying him with a depth that made his breath catch. "Are you still committed to this role?" "Despite the resistance, yes," he answered without hesitation. "I am." Victoria's eyes softened, a rare break in her armor. "Good, because I did not make this decision lightly, and I do not regret it." The room faded around them for a brief moment, leaving only the weight of the truth between them. Then she stepped back, regaining her usual command. "We have work to do," she said, and Ethan nodded, because despite the cold stares, despite the whispered doubts, despite the scars left by old grief and new battles, he finally understood something powerful. He belonged here. Not because he was invited, not because the team approved, but because he earned his place in a world that had once tried to erase him. And he was not leaving. 3 weeks later, Chicago was wrapped in a pale morning fog when Ethan Cole found himself walking once more through the glass doors of Orion Dynamics. But today felt different. Today, tension buzzed beneath the surface like static before lightning. The upgraded AI system refined relentlessly since the New York demo was scheduled for a full-scale deployment test across every high-load environment the company managed. If it succeeded, Orion Dynamics would step into a new era. If it failed, the consequences would echo for years. Ethan took a slow breath as he entered the development bay. Screens flickered with cascading diagnostic status bars, rolling upward error logs refreshing in real time. Engineers spoke in clipped, urgent tones. Even Andrew Bishop, usually composed to the point of arrogance, looked strained. This was no ordinary test. This was an event that could redefine reputations and expose weaknesses that had been buried for far too long. Victoria Lane stood near the center of the room, her posture straight, her suit immaculate, her presence radiating authority. Yet even she had a faint tension around her eyes, a warning sign for anyone who knew how to read her carefully guarded emotions. She turned when she sensed Ethan enter, giving him a brief, almost invisible nod. More personal than professional, but subtle enough that no one else would notice. The test began with a ripple of digital motion. Across the main wall, a massive grid of systems came online. Artificial intelligence modules spun up servers linked across states, and simulations launched at increasingly demanding intensity. Ethan monitored the deep learning patterns from his workstation, scanning for anomalies before they had the chance to spread. At first, everything moved smoothly. Then, at the 32nd minute mark, the first anomaly appeared. A cluster of servers in the Denver node began to flicker in and out of sync latency spikes, shooting upward like tiny red needles. A few engineers noticed immediately, voices rising in concern. Within seconds, another anomaly followed on the Phoenix server's similar signature, nearly identical timing. That was the problem. Identical failures did not happen by accident. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Something was not malfunctioning. Something was interfering. The room buzzed with rising panic. Andrew issued orders directing 2 teams to isolate the Denver and Phoenix nodes. But before they could act, a third spike hit the Seattle cluster. Then a fourth. Then a fifth. Dozens of red alerts began blinking across the grid, blooming across the map like wildfire. Someone is stressing the system intentionally. Ethan said aloud, the words slicing through the chaos. Heads turned sharply toward him. The accusation hung in the air, dangerous and unavoidable. Victoria stepped closer, folding her arms, gaze sharp as steel. Explain. Ethan pointed toward the anomaly signatures. The timing isn't random. Each spike mirrors the previous one with a delay of exactly 4 seconds. That pattern is engineered, not accidental. Andrew stiffened. You are suggesting sabotage. That is a serious accusation. I am not suggesting, Ethan replied calmly. I am identifying. Victoria leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Then where is the intrusion point? Ethan moved rapidly through the logs, fingers flying across the keyboard. His instincts sharpened, recalling every sleepless night he had spent studying these systems long after his janitorial shift ended. The irregular traffic, the looping requests, the forged timestamps, they formed a trail faint but traceable. He found it. The breach originates from an internal subnet, Ethan said. Someone inside the building. A wave of cold realization swept across the room. Engineers exchanged frightened glances. Victoria's expression became unreadable, a mask that signaled both fury and control. Shut down external access, she ordered. Limit all privileges except core. Her voice resonated with the kind of authority that could command storms. Find the source. Ethan dug deeper, sorting through layers of encrypted pathways. Then his stomach tightened. The source was routing through a device in the engineering wing itself, one assigned to Andrew's team. But as he followed the trail, another truth emerged. It was not Andrew. It was someone working under him. Ethan stood. It is coming from workstation 34, lower west corner. The team rushed toward the area. A young engineer, quiet, always polite, rarely noticed, stepped back from his desk too late. His screen revealed the final sequence of the attack. His face went pale, his hands trembling as security approached. Andrew stared at him in disbelief. Why would you do this? The young engineer swallowed hard. Because, his voice cracked, because I was told the janitor didn't deserve a seat at this table. Because I was told to prove the system wasn't stable, that we could place the blame where it belonged. He looked at Ethan, shame flooding his eyes. I'm sorry. Ethan did not answer. He could not. The betrayal tasted metallic on his tongue. Security escorted the engineer away. The room buzzed with shock and anger, though some glances held guilt, recognizing how easily suspicion had been encouraged. Whispered spread like poison. Victoria did not speak until the room grew still again. We repair the damage now. Her voice was steady, layered with frost. No delays. Ethan turned back to his station, hands steady, mind focused. Working side by side with the remaining engineers, he rewired bypasses, stabilized the failing clusters, corrected corrupted nodes, and rebuilt the predictive chain. His guidance, swift and confident, kept the team moving like a single organism, adapting under pressure. Slowly, painfully, the red alerts faded. Yellow softened into green. The system exhaled back into stability. When the final light turned solid emerald, the entire room fell silent. Then applause broke out, unexpected, overwhelming, echoing off the glass walls like a wave finally crashing after hours of restraint. Ethan froze startled, unable to process it at first. He had grown used to whispers and cold gazes. This sound felt foreign, powerful, almost unreal. Victoria approached him through the crowd. She did not applaud. She did not need to. Her expression, quiet pride wrapped in controlled relief, said more than words could. "You saved us again," she said softly. Ethan shook his head. "We saved it together." She held his gaze, something unspoken passing between them. "Ethan," she said, voice lower, "this company is different because of you." For a moment he could not breathe. Then he felt it like the world settling into a new alignment. Not the janitor, not the outsider, not the lucky anomaly. A man who rebuilt what others broke. A man who refused invisibility. A man who earned his place not by title, but by truth. Outside the windows, the fog began to lift from the lake, revealing the first thin strokes of sunlight breaking through the clouds, quiet, steady, unstoppable. Just like him. In the end, Ethan's journey reminds us of a truth many companies overlook. Brilliance often hides in quiet corners waiting for the right moment to be seen. True innovation doesn't come from titles or degrees, but from minds willing to question, to observe, and to act when others freeze. As experts know, talent thrives where opportunity meets courage, and sometimes courage comes from someone no one expected. If this story moved you or opened a new perspective, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more powerful narratives about resilience, leadership, and the people who change the game from the shadows. And before you go, drop a short comment below, just 2 or 3 words that captures what this story means to you. Try simple words like hidden strength,